Commission. And as chair, I'm calling this meeting to order, as I mentioned, and I am calling in from my home here in Ann Arbor. Welcome to the March 8th, 2022 electronic meeting of the Energy Commission. This virtual meeting is to affect social distancing and to mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We will conduct this meeting similar to in-person meetings. Commissioners, during roll call, please indicate your current location. And during the meeting, please remain on camera, just as you would be visible during an in-person meeting. Also mute your microphone when not speaking. Public comment will be held via telephone only. To speak during any of this public meeting opportunities, and there will be two, please call one of the following toll-free numbers: 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099. And enter then the meeting ID number, which is 937-6751-6819 on your phone. This information, along with, is available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city's website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16 and AT&T channel 99, as well as online at a2gov.org/watchctn. Missy, would you please read the land acknowledgement?
Absolutely. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from Indigenous people. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
I have to unmute. Thank you very much, Missy. Would you now take the roll call? And before you do so, I'd like to acknowledge that Councilmember Radina informed us before the meeting that he's not able to be present tonight. He is on an airplane on his way to Washington, D.C. He indicated that depending on when he arrives, he may be able to join in at the end of the meeting. Go ahead.
Great. I'm going to sort of stick on that train. Commissioner Clevey has also shared that he'll be absent tonight.
Okay.
Commissioner Hookham.
Chuck Hookham here from my home office in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner McComber. Let me just make sure I was in the waiting room. Okay. Commissioner Levin.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Great. Chair Mirsky.
You're in Ann Arbor.
Great. Oh, they're so fast. Vice Chair Colvin Garcia.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Councilmember Briggs.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner McCoy.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner George.
Here in Ann Arbor, and I'll be on camera in just a second.
We miss you. Commissioner Kerber.
Here and in Ann Arbor.
Awesome. Commissioner Peck.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Juneau.
Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Stevenson. All right. Chair, let me just check the room. You have a quorum.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. So could I have a motion to approve the agenda and then a second? Motion from Councilmember Briggs and a second by Commissioner Juneau. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
I don't see anybody that, or didn't anybody oppose or any concerns. None registered, so the agenda is approved. Next is approval of the minutes. Those were posted a little bit late, but they are up. Hopefully people have had a chance to read them. Do I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of last month's meeting? Motion by Commissioner Hookham and seconded by Commissioner Levin. All in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed or any concerns? None registered. The motion passes. So we now are on to public input for the first set of input, at least. Again, this is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you're watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 937-6751-6819. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone and you will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. And then finally, please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Right. Caller ending in 134.
Thank you, Dr. Stultz, Chair Mirsky, Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. I'm glad to see city solar installation and the green rental housing program on the agenda. Rental housing is especially key from an emissions standpoint, so I really commend OSI for taking on this intractable problem. I read the slide deck and I have one question about that. I apologize to staff for posing the question in advance of the presentation. The question is about slide 11, occupant weatherization. I have some personal history here. Back in 1985, I helped organize a petition drive for what we called the Basic Weatherization in Rental Housing Act. We got the signatures to put it on the ballot. Voters overwhelmingly approved it, and it became section 528 of City Code Chapter 105, which is still on the books. This mandates weather stripping, crack sealing, and caulking at all inside-outside interfaces, and attic insulation to at least R30. Landlords must meet these standards in order to obtain a certificate of compliance, the lack of which entitles tenants to withhold rent. 37 years later, I'm still a renter, and 2 years ago, I was forced back onto the depressing local rental market in midwinter. I toured a couple dozen rental units, several of which were complete dumps that did not come close to meeting these weatherization standards. Misaligned doors without weather stripping, cracks in unsealed window frames, uninsulated utility connections, incredibly drafty rooms, you name it. Energy sieves. If you're a longtime Ann Arbor renter, you've seen this too. I noticed that occupant weatherization, slide 11, is one element of the green rental housing program you'll be hearing about today. I read the slide as saying that we will now allow tenants to install basic weatherization measures without penalty. My question is, can we better enforce Section 8528 so that landlords themselves do the work as we intended back in 1985 and as code dictates, rather than putting the burden on tenants to do it? I suppose we were naive back then to assume that landlords would comply. But given the new urgency of climate change and our 820 goals, maybe we can step up enforcement now. Thanks for any insights staff can provide on this question. I'm really looking forward to the presentation.
Thanks, Ken.
Very much for your comments.
I'll just flag, we have that. Zach will present after our first, and we'll raise that back up. Absolutely. Great. Caller ending in 661.
Hello.
Yes, we hear you.
Great. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Gus Teschke. I live at 313 Montgomery. I have a question for Dr. Stelz. I'm part of Ann Arbor Indivisible, and we were very happy when the Energy Commission and City Council managed to pass a resolution to do a feasibility study for a municipal electric utility. And some of us in Ann Arbor Indivisible participated in Ann Arbor for Public Power's petition drive that gathered 1,300 signatures for a feasibility study. And, we really saw the interest in the community for this study. We're hoping that Dr. Stoltz will release the draft of the RFP so we can follow along in this process. Can that be done?
What we will do is we will take up that question at the time that we give reports, including report from staff and OSI. So this is not an active Q&A session. This is just a time for public comment.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Looks like Missy is frozen. You're back, Missy, but your image is frozen, if you hear me.
Sorry about that.
It looks like you're now live with us.
I'm live. I'm back alive.
You're moving and
I'm unclear. I'm unclear if I'm alive, but I think that I'm live. Yes. So did you hear anything? I cut out right away, didn't I?
You did. We didn't hear anything. We had a question that was called in, and I responded that this is not an active Q&A session, but that you would likely be able to address the question when you give your report later in the meeting.
Absolutely. That's delightful. Great. Caller ending in 228. Oh.
Hello? You're very faint.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. My name is Greg Woodring. I'm from Ann Arbor Public Power. I very much appreciate the chance to speak today. I, like Gus, am calling in. I'm mostly curious about just the progress with the RFP. As probably everybody on the commission knows, Ann Arbor Public Power is pretty committed to trying to bring about a municipal energy utility in Ann Arbor. We have been in this interim period while we're waiting to hear the results of the feasibility study, focusing on education campaigns, learning more about what this process looks like, and hoping to educate the public on it. And in addition to just trying to see if we can, help out where we can with bringing this about. So we're really just hoping that we could get a bit of an update about how this RFP is coming along, and if we could potentially have any sort of public input session or just some amount of public visibility into what that draft RFP would look like before it goes out to bid, just so that as a community, we can all kind of be engaged in this process together and make sure that we're all doing this in an open, transparent way that allows us to kind of have that engagement that's really needed to run this sort of campaign. So really much appreciate all the work that everybody's been doing on this, and I appreciate the chance to speak. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you for calling in and for your thoughts and questions.
Chair Brisky, that's all.
Okay, great. So anyone that did call in or wants to provide public comments, you'll have a second opportunity at the end of the meeting. So we have an interesting agenda in front of us, as we've already heard actually from some of the callers. And the first topic is going to be solar at or on city facilities. And that's going to be initially a presentation from staff, I believe, Missy, and then consideration of a resolution. So I will turn things over to you.
Great. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Simi Barr, who is on the OSI team and has been spearheading a lot of this project. And I also want to acknowledge that with us, we have Mark and Scott, two of the two bidders for the project. So Simi is going to walk us through it, and the team is available to answer questions. So Simi, over to you.
Thank you, Missy, and thank you to the Energy Commission for allowing us to take some time to talk about this project to install solar on various city facilities. My name is Simi Barr, Energy Analyst in the Office of Sustainability, and like Missy said, we're joined by Mark DeRogi from Homeland Solar and Scott Amaduri from Interlogix. We'll elevate them after I present quickly, and we can have more of a discussion around this. So I'll be reviewing high-level elements of this project, after which we can go into that discussion with our vendors. So the intent isn't to really analyze each design, but go over more of the overview. You all have access to this slide deck, and if there are more detailed questions, we can get into those later on. So we'll start with a review of the Interlogix work, and then their portfolio, and then switch over to Homeland. So early last year, the OSI staff worked on the creation of an RFP to solicit designs for solar on various city facilities. And in the spring, we selected two firms for those various sites. Homeland for a package of park sites, and Interlogix for some of our larger municipal sites. And then throughout the second half of 2021, OSI and city staff worked with these two firms to develop designs for our various sites and iterate them based on feedback gathered. So the intent is, as far as the timeline goes, is to have some of these, at least some of these sites online by 2022 this year, though supply chain issues are leading to long lead times on many of these. So that's a consideration to have in all of this. So overall, we're looking at putting solar on 17 sites, though some of those sites have multiple arrays on each because of things like multiple meters and things like that, which actually ups the number. The motivation here, much of the motivation is around our A20 goals and the first strategy of A20, which is powering the grid with 100% clean and renewable energy. And as we know from our energy principles, we're targeting local and resilience are high priorities when we're thinking about our energy grid. And this project really hits on both of those things in various ways. So across the various sites we're looking at multiple array types, and they're really based on the site specifications, and that's been part of that iteration with city staff. So some of those are ground mount systems, carports, rooftop mounted systems, and we even have a floating solar option, which is quite exciting. We're also looking at including things like energy storage and EV charging at these various sites where they make sense, sort of hitting on other ones of our sustainability goals around electrified transportation and resilience and that clean grid. As far as our financing options go, our partners at Interlogix and Homeland have helped us look at various financing options. So from 100% upfront payments to a PPA option with varying levels of down payment in the first place, and then 20-year PPA options. As far as these are our Interlogix sites. So we've got 6 sites. You'll see 7 locations on the map. That 7th is up here in the northwest. That's our water treatment plant, the floating solar option that's on the retention pond behind wines. Across these sites, we have the total capacity between 3.2 and 4.3 megawatts, up to 4.3 megawatts, depending on that floating solar option. These are all rooftop and ground mount systems, other than the floating solar option. They're more, those types of arrays, rooftop and ground mounts, tend to be cheaper than carports. And the larger sites having these larger consumptions give us more of an economy of scale and present pretty competitive cost per watt figures. I'll call out this greenhouse gas reduction number, 2,700 metric tons. Just for context, that's approximately equivalent to the greenhouse gas emissions from our entire city fleet in the year 2020. So it's a very significant amount, and we're excited by the prospect of offsetting that amount of emissions. I'm going to skip ahead to our homeland sites. So these are the park sites I mentioned. So we have 11 sites across here, but like I said, some have multiple meters. So things like the golf courses, we have both clubhouses and barns, maintenance areas, and pumps. All these things are on different electrical services and different electrical meters. So they have arrays designed for each. We also have some designs that we have multiple design options for some of these sites. So things like a cheaper option to a more expensive, expansive option. And that gives us some flexibility depending on our funding amounts. So this slide gives us a good summary over what those options look like. We have between about 0.8 to 1.15 megawatts, depending on that sizing, and that's going to cost somewhere around $1.75 to $3 million, depending on those options. Carports are more costly, like I mentioned. It's engineering designs and sourcing materials for those make them significantly more costly. But from working with park staff and the Parks Advisory Commission, both expressed interest in maintaining as much ground space as possible for programming. One of the great things about our parks is there's places to run around and do activities, and in some cases, putting ground mount systems in there just wouldn't make the most sense based on how those spaces are programmed. So, in conclusion, this is really fitting into our goals in a number of ways. One, we're maximizing on-site renewables. This is a massive expansion of distributed generation on city facilities. Also, this gives us the opportunity to unlock recurring savings for various operational investments we can make in the future. So by paying for these upfront or by doing partial PPA options, we can actually achieve energy rates that are lower than what we're currently paying for. And that delta can be used in a number of really exciting ways to further various climate goals we have here. The estimates based on the financial elements run by our two firms show something on the order of $15 million in savings in the next 25 to 30 years over the lifetime of these systems. This also shows great city leadership in the space of local distributed generation and local energy generation. The first year electricity generation, a conservative estimate based on these models, is almost 5 million kilowatt hours, which is over 12% of city electricity usage. That's based on 2018 numbers, which it's actually reduced since then. So it would actually be a larger percentage even than that. And that would be for a cost of around $9 million, and that's a pretty competitive cost per watt. Also, the annual greenhouse gas reduction from that would be almost 3,500 metric tons of CO2 annually which is quite a bit more than that figure I quoted around the city fleet, which is closer to 3,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions. So as far as the next steps go, we're working through prioritization of these sites with the help of city staff, and as city council debates ARPA funding, we'll be able to sort of plug in that prioritization understanding that we've developed in order to see where this project might end up. So with that, I'd like to thank you all, and I'd like to elevate Mark and Scott from Interlogix and Homeland, who can speak to this work at a very high level, and also are great with the overall concept. So I'll do that, and also would love to hear questions and comments from commissioners if you have them.
Do we have any additional presentations then, or do we go directly to questions?
This is Scott Amadori with Interlogix. We do have additional material that we can present, but no need that we have to, and more a question of following your direction.
Go ahead.
I'll make a couple comments, and I think this is probably germane for a variety of reasons. Number one, part of the reason we looked at third-party ownership of this project and third-party financing, there is a federal or a series of federal tax credits and other tax advantages. So the federal investment tax credit drives us to having third-party ownership. From our experience, both nonprofits that can't utilize that, municipalities, and even corporate off-takers don't have the necessarily the ability or the capability to monetize that internally. So that's one thing we built into the financing mechanism of this to give the city a lower cost of deliver power under that regime. The second part of that is that a lot of the Build Back Better proposals had increasingly stepped up that investment tax credit. None of those have been successfully passed yet, but we are continuing to watch Build Back Better and would pass any of those cost savings on to the city in terms of a lower finance cost and lower delivered cost of power under those regimes. Last point around that, and again, is just kind of what we're seeing globally across the everything is the challenges with supply chain. We have put this together with pricing based on what we know today. We know there is no guarantee of future prices until we place orders on key equipment. And as recent events have played out, even shipping costs are going to be somewhat in flux as we all deal with the increase in cost of fuel in particular. So I guess I'd say, for a variety of reasons, time is of the essence. We want to give the city the best benefit of this, and we'll pass on any future cost savings from improvements in investment tax credit or improvements in supply chain costing.
I'll just add to that while we didn't go through every single slide in the deck, in the packet, you can see each of the sites and the initial designs. We just thought that was going to take up so much time to go through every single design and design option. But if you have questions, the team is here to answer those.
Questions?
I'll make one more comment too, and I think this probably speaks to both our portfolio and to Homeland's as well. Many of the sites we wanted to go larger on solar, we weren't able to hit a significant percentage of the overall consumption. That is limited somewhat by DTE policy on net metering. We can't go offsite. We can't go necessarily on an offsite kind of regime. And again, that points to sort of the prior discussion on establishing your own public utility. That does probably give you guys some flexibility that you don't have currently with the DTE regime. That's point one. Point two, again, on site, we were limited by not just what was available from a roof tip or ground space. We were also limited on some locations from the existing mechanical structure of the roof and our ability to add more weight by adding solar onto the roof. So again, we were always balancing that as part of our design. I'm sure Mark would say the same thing on their designs as well.
So, Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks for presentations. Super interesting. I didn't. You kind of briefly mentioned the floating solar at the water treatment plant, which sounds interesting. I wasn't sure if there were going to be other types of installations there as well. And then I was curious. I'm not sure. I didn't see that one kind of in the chart. I wasn't in terms of that installation. I'm not sure what sort of power needs the water treatment plant has, but what are there additional advantages of that location in terms of, security for? I just wondered if you could speak a little bit more to that installation.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. The water treatment plant uses a very significant amount of electricity, and as Scott noted, there are constraints based on that site in particular. So using that retention pond for additional floating solar would increase the capacity greatly of that site. Certain considerations there. There are considerations there when it comes to certain nesting birds in particular. So we decided to, in collaboration with NAP, Natural Area Preservation, we talked about how we could display the efficacy of floating solar and increase the capacity of the solar on site overall without negatively impacting that habitat. Scott, do you have anything to add about that floating solar?
Just one more comment, and this is probably not as qualitative, but it is part of what is being done in California in particular. In California, the addition of floating solar on reservoirs in other areas has been shown to have a reduction in the amount of evaporation. So it does help provide a benefit to a reduction in algae and a reduction in evaporation. Again, very, very much an issue in California with the droughts and extended droughts there. But there is a benefit to it in addition to just the solar production.
This is just the graphic. So this is behind Wines in the water retention area. This is where we modeled the floating solar, and you'll see the plant obviously over here. And then for the plant itself, there's roof mounted and ground mounted systems.
If you can jump ahead, Missy, I think on slide 27-ish, there's a photo of an example.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, this is a different deck. My bad. I think you passed over it.
I didn't even look. Yep, of a floating.
Yeah. There we go, bottom right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Councilmember Riggs, did you have another follow-up question? No. Commissioner Calvin Garcia.
Thank you, Commissioner Mirsky. My question is with regards to the ability to have enough production that will offset as much of the load as possible, and that considering the constraints with our utility, and then looking at opportunities in the future for a microgrid, like how that works, and if that's part of the design already at this stage for designing the solar arrays to be able to be expandable in the future, maybe to save some money now at the beginning. Just wondering, that's my first question. My second question is, are you seeing significant price increases these days going on with materials, especially considering what's going on right now?
Yeah, thanks. So prices are increasing, and I'll let Scott and Mark, if they have additional comments on that, speak to it, because I know we've seen with the supply chain that occurring. Scott,
sure.
Do you have anything to add on the expandability of these arrays?
Yeah, I guess, twofold. One is all of these systems that we put in, the larger ones at least, we did put an option for energy storage there. So with that energy storage, effectively, that building has the ability to be islanded or have its own mini microgrid associated with it. We did not look at yet integrating in, say, a backup generator against that. So again, each building has its own conceptual microgrid that it can do on this side of it. Larger scale, as you guys look to, say, a district energy or district microgrid, that is something that certainly makes sense. In particular, if we look at Wheeler Center with the larger ground mount array that's going to go up there with DTE on the landfill, that is a great opportunity for a much larger microgrid. Really, the kind of fundamentals come down to both a regulatory policy question and then also just a physical interconnection. How do you isolate that? We know from some work we've done with Cuyahoga County in Cleveland, as an example, they are also looking at their own district energy plant to service the downtown region. Again, we're very, very much focused in on a downtown region or a specific region to be able to connect to that. We continue to watch sort of what's happening from both a technical perspective, from a cost perspective, and from a policy perspective. And certainly would want to make sure we can enable as much of that as we can. But right now we focused in on what we can do within current policy constraints and do it sort of all behind the meter in building. On cost, in particular, steel costs have escalated yet again today. So all the key components that are steel-based, like racking, is going to continue to increase. All the major commodities, I think, are still stable, but it is a daily fluctuating price right now that we're seeing on that. The biggest risk right now, I think on top of all that, is just, again, shipping costs. So things that are even landed in the U.S. To get trucked from California to Ann Arbor is going to be a different cost today than it was just yesterday, just with the increase in fuel costs.
Thank you very much.
Certainly.
Yes, thanks for the presentation, Simi. First of all, I had a few questions. I'll start with kind of an easy one. With the floating storage, how does that work in the winter when the pond freezes over? Is it still functional?
Yes, it is. It's actually the mechanism of it or how it works. It is a plastic thing. Essentially, all it does is just bubble to the top. It sits on top of the ice. It is designed and has been deployed, this technology, even in call it wetlands that have a marsh area that evaporates, so it can sit on the ground. As long as that ground is relatively flat, it's still fine. But again, it is designed to sit on that kind of a regime and environment.
Cool, very cool. I don't know who's best to speak to this. I saw on one of those slides that you are considering battery storage. I was just wondering, like, if you could speak a little bit towards that a little more. Like, is it at every site, and how does it compare to the daily energy requirements at the site where the batteries are located?
Yeah, certainly. It was not at every site. We focused in on the Interlogix side, and I think Mark had similar kind of focus on some level of critical load and what sort of the effective or the cost-effective approach with batteries are. Typically, we're looking in MISO and in the Midwest region and PJM as well on where there are the largest demand charges and how we're able to effectively address those from a cost perspective with batteries. We didn't try and island. We didn't try and take any of these facilities fully off grid. We just don't have enough physical space on building to go do that with a combination of batteries and solar. But we did focus in on where we had high demand charges on facilities, and we could cost effectively address that with batteries at the current pricing. We continue to watch. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say, we continue to watch battery pricing too. Battery pricing was going through a pretty good decline until the last couple of years. Now, despite all the plants being announced in the U.S., they haven't ramped up the production. So we expect battery pricing to come back down again in 2023 and 2024. But really, it's still at a somewhat high price right now.
That's a good tee up too, to say what we designed for is battery ready for every site. So not all sites were ready to deploy the battery, but we're designing the system so that we can when the time is right. So we don't want to preclude that.
Gotcha. Okay, last question. So regarding some of these are at carports, and is there a consideration to have those available for charging cars? And also, can we count, like, if we start charging cars, does that count towards the amount the DTE will allow you to offset, or no? Or does that count towards your total that you're allowed to generate, I should say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hope
Hi,
you
Mark.
can hear me. Yes, the load that's added by charging EVs would be part of the DTE load that could be offset as long as it's on the same physical meter at the site. So generally with carports, it provides kind of a convenient place to put car chargers. So for any of the city park sites where we're contemplating carports, we're assuming that some number of car chargers will go in at those facilities.
Thank you.
Commissioner George.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given the history the city has had with some of the installations of solar projects, I wanted to ask if the workers that are going to be handling and installing these solar panels, licensed journeymen or registered apprentices. I didn't know if Missy or you or Simi could state that the contractors.
Can you speak to?
Yeah, sure, Simi. Yeah, so the requirement is unequivocal that everyone has to adhere to Michigan law and Michigan policy full nonstop, right? In terms of who and how regulation and what's required within that. We have this contract was before the responsible purchaser response. Gonna trip on it. You're gonna help me. Thank you. Lots of words in my head. That said, though, we have asked both Scott and Mark, and they have agreed to fill out all the documentation, even though they don't have to, so that we can have that be part of the process when we come forward to council. So I don't know that I can answer that specifically. I'll give space if Mark and Scott want to, but we are going to do all the documentation because we want to respect the fact that while this predates it by almost a year, we recognize that that's an important sentiment to the community.
Yeah, at least from Homeland's point of view, we are licensed electrical contractor and follow all of the regulations and would comply with that, certainly.
Yeah, as will we.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Peck.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to follow on Noah really quick. I'm very intrigued about how these things manage to survive the winter and the ice. But rather than trying to visualize that, I'm just wondering, in the winter, it's in the ice. The ice isn't, thanks to global warming, isn't safe enough to walk on probably. But you got your panels out there and they're covered in snow. How much have you calculated how much generation loss there is, given the number of days that are likely to obscure the panels with snow?
Yeah, our methodology is using a very proven technology. We model and simulate every single one of these arrays. Every one of them has a snow loss factor associated with it. It's essentially a monthly factor, but it takes a location-specific weather data and a specific design, does a simulation, looks at a weather normalization over the last, I think it's the last 50 years worth of NOAA data, and looks at sort of an average energy production. From that, we then apply a soiling or a snow loss factor. So there's a loss factor associated with just dirt. So if it's a dry month, typically a dry month, it's going to have a little more of a factor of dirt that would accumulate on it. In particular, if you think of desert Southwest, you have a lot more of that. In Michigan, you have a lot more rain that cleans the panels. There is additionally a factor there that looks at the impact of snow. As you pointed out, global climate change likely will reduce the amount of snow we have on that in those winter months. But again, we have modeled that fully. I think it's a 35-40% loss factor in January alone, just because of the fact that we have snow on the panels.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
A real quick comment to that. There is a unit within the University of Michigan that has developed a coating that is supposed to reduce snow accumulation on panels. I don't know how far along they are. I don't think it's reached the market yet, and I don't know what the economics are, but that might be something that we may want to look at some point in time in the future.
Certainly. Yeah, we'd love to collaborate with them and figure out a way to even test some of it on a real life system.
Just picking up on that, wanted to share that we have talked to that unit, and Scott and Mark will put you in touch. So far, their research is phenomenal for 1-year application, but they do have to do a reapplication every year. So they're working on a longer term application. Otherwise, you have to reapply the substrate or the surface coating annually. So they're not quite ready for commercial viability. We thought we were going to bring it into solarize from day one, but not yet.
Commissioner Peck, did you have a follow-up question? No. Okay. Did anybody else have any questions? I have a couple of quick questions, hopefully, and comments. First of all, it sounds to me like there were that the size of the units are constrained by physical constraints, not based on any kind of load, and therefore adding electrical load through electrification or EV charging really would not have enabled us to install larger arrays. Is that correct?
I think it depends on, it's a site-specific thing. So,
Yeah, sure.
for instance, Vets Park has a very large load that could accommodate almost anything, but other sites are fairly limited in the load, and then we just match that pretty easily with a certain number of panels.
But what I'm wondering is, if we electrify first, would that allow us, or at a later point in time, would that allow us then to add additional solar to be able to power that load?
Yeah, sure. I don't think you necessarily have to electrify first. If we're doing it at the same time, for instance, adding EV load, we could go through with DTE certain assumptions on how many miles are being driven and how many chargers are being used. And we add that capacity in the beginning.
And it's more relevant for the park sites. For the larger sites, the sites that Interlogix is working on, that we're site constrained. That's space constraint for sure. But for example, the farmers market, we have a lot more space. So we just don't have high usage, hence why we're looking at adding some chargers and others to increase. So park sites tend to have more flexibility.
Yep.
Quick exception to that, though, I think it's the airport, right? So at the airport, we're driven really on the hangars. And again, it's not as high volume of an airport as most of the ones that have commercial traffic. But again, if there is EV charging added there, it would support larger load. There's more land available than we have actual usage there.
Yep. Okay, good. Couple of other just observations, just something to look at. You don't have to respond. There's going to be a fairly tall building that's going to be built near the farmers market. I don't know if there's going to be any shading issues. Probably not. It seems to me it's probably too far away, but it might be something that's just worth checking. One other thing, are we re-roofing in any of these cases? And my understanding is that when re-roofing is done, that if insulation is added to the re-roofing, then that cost of re-roofing can also be applied for the federal tax credit. Is that applicable in any of these cases? I checked with a tax accountant because I was looking at that for my own home, and that was the ruling.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Scott.
No, go ahead, Mark.
I think that on the shading issue for farmers market, we did model that building, and it caused something like 5 to 7% loss. So some amount, not a huge impact.
Right.
And yeah, and then what's the second question again?
Roofing eligibility for ITC.
Installation.
Yeah,
so we cost and eligible for federal tax credit.
Yeah, we normally say, we are not tax advisors. However, we are aware that many customers and organizations do take that credit when they find they need to replace the roof kind of as a condition of putting solar on it. So a good example of that is actually the maintenance barn at Cobblestone. The shingles are really in bad shape. So if this was a normal commercial client, then sure, they'd be able to monetize that roofing cost and include it for purposes of the ITC.
And so it sounds to me like that may be an opportunity, particularly, like I said, if insulation is added, then I think it's pretty clear that that's eligible for the tax credit.
But we're not a tax-paying entity.
Yeah, I know, but we're using a third
For the
party.
third party finance.
For the
Yeah.
PPA, if we do it that way, right?
Right.
Exactly.
So we have done projects that way, and there is different private letter rulings from the IRS on how much that cost is eligible for the investment tax credit. The strongest argument is doing white roofs with a bifacial module. So a module that produces energy on both the front side and the back side of that, getting the reflectivity off that white roof, that drives a lot of it.
Yeah.
Again, like Mark said, we are not tax advisors, but we have worked with a number of different investors to make sure that we have full ITC eligibility for that.
Okay. And in the case where we have third-party financing on these, are these installations going to revert to city ownership at X years down the road? How does that work?
Yeah, all the PPAs have a term to comply with IRS rules. We typically don't have it's like a dollar buyout. They have a buyout that's based on a fair market valuation and a calculated value. That preserves our ITC eligibility. Otherwise, it looks like a capital lease, and the IRS treats it very differently from an investment tax credit perspective. But it is an industry standard publication on how you structure these. We follow that guidance and follow that contract as our draft contract. But again, it's a well proven methodology. We Interlogix has done 12 megawatts of PPAs in Ohio alone. Everything from universities to communities and municipalities.
Right. Okay. Then I have one last question. Missy, would you mind putting up slide 21? I think it's easier if everybody can see the slide, they'll understand my question. This relates to Homeland and the difference between the min and the max. So on the right-hand side, if I take the min and the max, it seems to me that the incremental cost going from min to max really doesn't make sense, especially if you consider that, in a sense, there's an opportunity cost. So what if you look at the cost per watt, the cost per watt goes from 209 to 255. But if you just look at the cost per watt for the incremental 50,000 kilowatt hours, so you're going from 1.841 megawatt hours to 1.891, so that's roughly 50,000 kilowatt hours. The cost for that additional 50,000 megawatt hours is really, really high. And if we were just floating in money, then spending an extra $700,000 to get that money, or maybe it's not 700,000. Where's the cost? Okay, yeah, it goes from 1.7 to 2.9 million. So it's actually, $1.2 million more to get just a minimal amount of additional generation. And it seems to me that $1.2 million would be much better spent on some other way of either generating electricity or electrifying or insulating or something else. So I'd like Cindy or Mark to comment on that.
Yeah, I think the most logical explanation is there's probably a typo in one of those numbers. So I should go back and take a look at it. The cost is going up quite a bit because generally to increase to go to max, we're talking about adding carports basically. So you are talking about adding, fairly expensive equipment to the sites. But having said that, you're right. I mean, you see the kilowatts DC is going from 843 to 1.15 megawatts. So the kilowatt hours produced should go up concurrently. So
I'd encourage staff and all of you to look at that. I mean, all of the numbers may be pegged to the same mistake, but if you look at the IRR drops dramatically, and that drops then for the whole investment, and the same thing for the NPV. And if you just look at it incrementally, to me, unless there is a mistake, we would be foolish. And Councilmember Briggs, I would ask that when this comes to council, that this be scrutinized, that we really do not want to spend an incremental amount of money for relatively low contribution in terms of generating power. And what we should be doing is using that incremental cost or that incremental expense and applying it to something that gives us much better return on our investment.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that first row is the usage. It's the initial energy kilowatt hours, about fifth row down, that is actually the difference of energy production. So it goes from 980,000 to 1.3 million.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, the point still applies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still point.
And a general comment on that. We've Simi and Missy and I have talked several times about it. So carports are a relatively expensive way to do solar. So there's no doubt about that. And, you know, if you're looking at it on a marginal basis, it's not going to look very good. So there are certain sites, for instance, Leslie Science Center, where that's pretty much the only option. There are other sites where we can decide. It's going to be up to the city to decide if they want to put carports there. There are some places, for instance, Fuller Park is another place where there's really not any ground opportunity. So your only option is kind of a fairly expensive way to do that. I think at one point Scott also had a carport option for City Hall, I believe. And so you're correct. It is if you have a better place to put your money where you can get more value out of it, that's a discussion that, you know, needs to be had.
Exactly. That's the opportunity cost question. If I spend, you know, $1 million on this, where could I spend $1 million, and what would the benefit of that $1 million be, or whatever it is? So, okay, that's it. And Missy, I think you want to show us, unless there's any other questions or comments.
I'll make one last comment back to your point about the roof. I guess I'd say I'd encourage the city to consider any buildings that need a new roof to look at a hybrid solar roof, third-party PPA ownership for that tax credits. Again, just something to put into kind of your planning process as you look at those.
Great. So, Missy or Simi, would you like to introduce the resolution of support?
I'm happy to introduce the resolution of support. So let me pull it up here. In light of, I'm not going to take for granted, I think you all probably know this, but right now this project was up for consideration for American Rescue Plan Act funding, and that went out to public vote. This is a project that is, as you can see, while we have to make final decisions, a lot of it's sort of chicken and egg between knowing how we're going to fund it, so we can determine how to move forward in terms of which sites and which designs, or we go which sites and designs and figure out how to fund it. So we're sort of in this interesting moment. But what happened last week is the city administrator did send some initial recommendations to council for consideration. Council is going to move forward with making a determination in the very near term about how to allocate ARPA funding. And this was a resolution for consideration by the body that basically outlines the process. The resolve clauses are that the Ann Arbor Energy Commission recommend that city council commit ARPA funding without identifying a specific number to support the project. That is literally it.
Do I have a, so Missy, what's the plan, if I may? I'm sorry, I didn't talk to you about this. Do we have a first and second reading, or is this basically limited in terms of controversy and scope that we would potentially vote on this tonight? What was your, what was staff's thought on this?
100% up to the discretion of the body. We weren't sure if you would find the presentation to be controversial. This is symbolic, would go with council just to say that the Energy Commission is supportive of the project. So I think sequentially, I don't know, I might actually tee up Councilmember Briggs. I'm not 100% sure when council is going to take this up. I think it could be as soon as their next council meeting. It might be longer. So if the body is supportive of the resolution, potentially passing it tonight would be good timing.
Yeah, I would say I'm not sure if it's going to come at the next meeting or the following meeting, but I would agree that if there's support, it might be beneficial to pass this tonight.
Yeah, especially since we meet monthly and council meets every 2 weeks, that would make sense that we act on this tonight. Do we have any comments or questions from commissioners or additional comments from staff with regards to the resolution? So I have two, and I'll leave this up to staff as to whether or not they make sense. So my understanding is that in the whereas clauses, this potentially could be strengthened by having two whereas clauses, one that would indicate the amount of CO2 emissions that would be reduced. I don't think I saw anything indicating what that was, just the number of megawatts. And the second is, and this is, I think, one of the unique elements of this particular investment with ARPA funds, is that by installing this, we also would get a reduction in our annual or monthly energy costs, which reduces expenses to the general fund. And so we actually get a financial benefit that general fund expenditures go down. And I don't think there's very many other ARPA funding opportunities that actually have a positive impact on the general fund. Of course, I don't know what the net savings are based on the financial models that are being considered here. And then, of course, the discussion that we just had about the incremental cost between the min, the medium, and the max installations from Homeland also impact what the savings would be in terms of metric tons of carbon. I think the 3.5, that was the minimum, that your 3,500, I think that was the minimum, right, Mixie?
I think that's right. It's hard for me to toggle between. Oh, somebody's telling me. They're 404. All right, I will update it if that's okay with you all. I'll go for the median. I'll pull the numbers. It's just hard for me to go between screens. So let me just hold it.
So I think showing the minimum there is, or at least, something that's in the range. There we are, something like that. And do we have a figure on slide 21 that we can, or no, I guess it's not on slide 21 because we have to look at the two to combine. But is there, Simi, can you provide us a figure that what the total net savings would be, at least in the minimum case? I mean, Councilmember Briggs, do you agree that, and Missy, that this is potentially important? I think that we provide that information to council, because council is going to be looking at giving money to this versus bridges versus affordable housing. Those have obviously a lot of benefits, but they don't have an impact on the general fund.
Mia sent me a note that it's 440 or 4,400 metric ton CO2 for the base case without the floating solar, and kind of medium Homeland scenario.
Okay. Commissioner Hookham.
The minimum would be about 3,400.
34, Simi?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go 34.
John, were you kind of advocating that maybe you look at this as like a capital improvement scenario where you take these competing ideas, maybe a min-max at Leslie, and figure out what the best solution is? Because it's not apparent when you just look at the numbers on slide 21. Would you advocate that happen very quickly here to help facilitate that?
I think, my recommendation to staff would be that staff does that and presents that to council when they make a final recommendation. I think we can still vote. I mean, this would be but this is up to the body. That I think we can still vote on a general resolution of support, which is basically the way this is worded. And we can still process tonight, because otherwise, if we wait, since we only meet monthly, this is not going to get in front of council. So I would recommend that, this is something that we generally want to support, and some of the details need to be worked out by staff in conjunction with city leadership and council as to what exactly is the best combination of solar installations, put it that way. Missy, you want to put the resolution back up? Okay, so we have that. And then the operational cost savings, what I would propose is that we leave the wording as it is, and that staff work on trying to come up with some figures so that that's quantified for council when council considers this against other alternatives. How does that sound?
Yeah, Chairman, we have, so the question really becomes on final design. So you're right. For when we go to council, happy to put those in. And it's different because it's not one fund, right? Water fund has its own fund, general fund has its own fund. So it really does depend on final design, but great point.
Yep. Can we get a motion on this? Does anybody move to consider the resolution in a second, and then we can have further debate? I should have done that first, sorry.
I move to consider this resolution.
And a second from, so we have a motion from Commissioner Calvin Garcia and a second from Commissioner Peck and Commissioner Juneau. I apologize that I sort of reversed the order of this, but do we have any other comments or questions with regards to the resolution? Seeing none, let's take a vote then. All those in favor of approving the resolution as it now stands in front of us, as opposed to the way it's was posted in Legistar. Everyone that's in favor, say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. And all those opposed? And any abstains? Commissioner Kerber, who is a Homeland employee, so thank you very much. I thought about that earlier and forgot, so thank you. So we have one abstention, and otherwise unanimously approved. So Missy, did you get the count on that? Very good. Okay. One down, two other topics to go. So Missy, or do we turn it directly over to Zach for the green rental housing presentation?
Yeah, I'll kick it to Zach. I just want to frame that this is an action that is in A20 under our energy efficiency strategy 3 category. This is something that's really, really important, as I know some of our speakers mentioned, because we have a lot of renters in the community. And we have a really strong foundation around rental inspections that we can build upon. And so I just want to take a moment, also thanks Simi for the great work he's doing, but also turn to Zach and really appreciate the national level leadership that he's bringing to this discussion and thinking creatively. So Zach's been leading a task force of stakeholders. You are the first public engagement around this topic officially starts tomorrow. So you are his dry run. And with that, Zach, can you tell us a little bit about the work on green rental housing?
Certainly. Good evening, commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me back this time to talk about a different building policy. And this time it's focused on rentals. Let's see here. I'm going to assume you can see my screen. Please stop me if you cannot. But the name for this policy is the Imaginative and Inventive Green Rental Housing. Let's get into it. I'm going to start with some background about why the Green Rental Housing Program has been an area of focus for the Office of Sustainability and Innovations. I'll discuss how the current policy recommendations came about, and then we'll look at what the policy recommendations are, including what the timeline has been and is going to be, and what upcoming engagement we're doing. Also, just to clarify, the where that I put in there is a bit of a misnomer. It's mostly all virtual. I wanted a where in there. It fit. I had the why, how, everything else. So moving on. Excuse me, to set the stage for this conversation, it will help to identify a few things. One is that when examining the greenhouse gas emissions that Ann Arbor is responsible for, according to our most recent inventory, we see that about 2/3 of those emissions come from buildings. And when we examine the residential buildings in Ann Arbor, we find that more than half of all the housing units available are currently rented. And finally, there are currently no existing rental housing initiatives related to climate change specifically. And so with these in mind, when the 820 plan was developed, and action specifically targeted at rental efficiency was included under Strategy 3. And as Missy just mentioned, Strategy 3 is broadly to improve the energy efficiency of our buildings citywide. But that's not the only 820 alignment. The Green Rental Housing Program also helps, in a way, fulfill the first action listed under Strategy 2, which is to get off of fossil fuels completely. And we must electrify wherever possible to fully realize 820. And just briefly, while it might feel redundant for this audience, I want to state for those who might be watching and aren't already familiar that 820 is Ann Arbor's plan to achieve a just transition to carbon neutrality by 2030. And it was unanimously adopted by City Council on June 1st of 2020. So we have not only a climate imperative to support these strategies, but also a local directive from our leaders. Okay, so how did this come about? Before we even started designing Ann Arbor's Green Rental Housing Program, our first step was to understand as much as possible about how to build such a program. And so over a year ago, we participated in a rental housing cohort with RMI, formerly Rocky Mountain Institute, to specifically examine policy pathways for rental policies. Since then, we've also participated in a rental efficiency learning group. This is actually still ongoing with the USDN and ACEEE, which is the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. So we wanted to learn as much as possible about what it takes to get a policy like this off the ground and for it to be as effective as possible. Concurrently, during those cohorts and beyond, we also examined how other cities across the country developed their rental programs where they exist, or where they developed efficiency programs and their housing programs and what their lessons learned were. We looked at what they learned and from their experience and growth about how to best leverage our program. I will note that there were some cities that used things that weren't specifically applicable to Ann Arbor, but we still were able to learn from those programs and adapt them for what makes more sense here in Ann Arbor. So once we were equipped with what we had learned through that previous groundwork, we began looking more closely at the particulars here in Ann Arbor. And this really helps paint the picture. So some of the information that we found were that there are about 31,500 units, rental units specifically, that are spread across 8,500 properties. When we look at those properties, the median year built for those is 1964. And some of those properties date back to the 1850s. So that means that a vast majority of the rentals that are on the market right now were built in a time before modern building codes. A couple of other things to note is that over half of all the rentals are single property owners. And then just to kind of help round out the picture, I threw in there that how a lot of those rentals are managed. So about 40% of them all are self-managed, and about 60% of them hire a manager of some sort. And so as we explored some of the learning groups, we also looked at other cities, and then we examined Ann Arbor. And then it was time to start building our own program. And so we invited representatives from a broad spectrum of perspectives to partake in this task force. There were tenants there that included the Intercooperative Council, the Ann Arbor Tenants Union, the Housing Caucus of GEO, the Graduate Employees Organization, We also had landlords that included the Washtenaw Area Apartment Association, Avalon Housing. There were representatives from multifamily properties and from Greek housing properties. And this group convened over 8 months, starting last June, and met through just this January. And so here's kind of a quick overview. I'm going to dive into each of these, but these are the primary policy components that this task force developed through lots of discussion. And so we'll get into those. First being the occupant weatherization. And I appreciate the question that preceded this presentation. Yes, it is already in the code. I unfortunately am unable to speak to why it is not, why it feels like it's not enforced. But I do want to highlight that this is not intended to be a primary driver of the success of this program. The other policy components that I am about to unveil are, you will see, going to be where the greatest impact comes from. The occupant weatherization policy component was tied in because the rentals right now are on a 2.5-year cycle. So if this passes council and goes into effect on January 1st of 2023, that means that there will be some rentals that between now and the time that they are inspected on their natural cycle will wait 3 years before any of these policy elements would be enforced. And therefore, this is sort of a bridge to gap that. And what it specifically allows is for tenants to do either temporary or permanent weatherization in the unit where it needs to be done without concern of penalty. And this was brought up during the task force by some tenants that expressed experiences with certain landlords that left them feeling like they would be penalized either through their security deposit or through extra charges at the end of their lease for having installed these measures. And so this is just a basic protection for those occupants who do want to do some basic weatherization. And that's pretty much occupant weatherization. So we'll dig in here a little bit to a little bit more of the meat of the program. One high impact component is going to be focuses on the efficiency of the appliances that are in the unit. And so this policy component sets a minimum standard for appliances. There will be the approach to getting these replaced is called time of replacement. The deadline for full replacement is 2030. So it currently gives about 8 years for landlords to upgrade their appliances. But in the meantime, you will be required to replace them with Energy Star rated appliances as they go out. So either through age or regular wear and tear, if a furnace or a water heater or another appliance is being replaced anyway, this requires that it be replaced with the Energy Star rated model. The reason this was incorporated is because a vast majority of the building source carbon emissions come from the energy that is required to heat our space and our water in residential spaces. That can account for upwards of 60% of the total energy use. And so this is a high leverage policy component to bring that energy down and to reduce the load on the energy on the grid as we electrify, but also makes it more affordable by reducing the energy costs for tenants. Next up is an efficiency checklist. There are two different pathways that landlords can pursue rental efficiency. And one of them is by following this prescriptive checklist, which it sets an energy efficiency target for rentals it also gives landlords choices and certain flexibilities in how they can achieve these targets. We are lucky in Ann Arbor. Missy mentioned also that we have an existing rental housing inspection program here in Ann Arbor, but primarily they include safety components. I'll show you an example here this is just a snapshot of the existing pre-inspection checklist, just to kind of give you an example of the types of things that are already included. It's kind of hard to read here, so don't strain your eyes too much, but what you can see here are things that are targeted at basic safety, like storage restraints near combustion appliances. That makes sense. Making sure there are secure locks on the doors. That makes sense. And while these are certainly important and they're on this checklist for good reason, perhaps you can see that that this existing checklist does not currently include things like energy efficiency and electrification, both of which have great impacts on the comfort and affordability of rentals for the tenants. So that's the prescriptive checklist is one way to do it. I'm going to hop over to another screen here to give you an idea of what is on the prescriptive checklist. And holler if you can't see this, but this is a long checklist. I'm going to go through it briefly just to give you an idea of what a landlord could see if this is the pathway that they choose. There are point values assigned to each action item that are on this list. And those point values were chosen to reflect the difficulty and or cost with executing that item. And this checklist calls currently for a minimum point value of 65 points. There are over 173 possible points that any particular unit could achieve. A lot of this prescriptive pathway is based on codes that are already in existence or have been written as model codes, including several that are listed here. And we included on this checklist an option or an exemption, if you will, for having met any of these existing certifications. So that's, if you have a passive house certification, you have exceeded or met all of the things that are on this prescriptive pathway. We won't require you to do this checklist if you can show your passive house certification, for instance. And so any of these others would also qualify. But let's take a look at a few of these items. So here's a section focusing on insulation, for instance, insulation in the attic, in the exterior walls, in the basement crawl space, what the requirement would be, and the point value, and you can tally up your own score. At the bottom, what you see here is the maximum possible. And I want to explain that says 9. And if you were to take out a calculator and add up all of these numbers above it, you would get a number greater than 9. However, you wouldn't be able to do that on this checklist because you wouldn't get a point. Let's say if you had R50 in your unit, you would get 3 points for R50, not 1 point for R30, and then 2 points for R38, and then another 3 points for R50. You would just get the one line item. And so that's why the maximum on this is 9. I also want to point out that there is a target minimum. This is not a required minimum because the whole point of this checklist is to offer that flexibility to landlords about how they may achieve their overall minimum point value of 65 points. If for whatever reason, landlord is unable to get points from this section, they can make up those points in another section. And so I just want to explain what that target minimum means. But here are some more action items for them. Certain air sealing requirements. If you were to get the points for the air changes per hour, that would require a rating from a certified rater or assessor. But there are several things on here that you can do that would not require you to get that. So you can, wherever visible, you can caulk and seal windows and doors around the house. You can replace all of the light bulbs with LEDs. And so you can see as we go through here a number of different point values for a number of different action items. There is the incentive here to replace the appliances, even though that is a separate policy component that has already been called out as a requirement. That is for time of replacement, like I said, or by the year 2030. The reason they are also in this checklist is we want to be able to give landlords who have already done these items a chance to collect the points that they would earn for doing those otherwise. So that's why you see appliances also on this checklist. As I continue scrolling down, heating sources and cooling sources get certain point values. You'll see that this is the only point where you will see gas given any point value on this checklist, gas appliances, I mean. And that is only if it is over 95% efficient. The reason this was included on here is to cover for instances where maybe somebody just put in an efficient furnace right before this policy. We don't want to have to force them into a position where they are incurring the cost of replacing this new furnace in order to get points. But we are going to require that it be efficient so that we are using as little fossil fuel as possible, if any at all. But you will see here that there is a strong preference for electric appliances so that we can continue pushing towards satisfying that second strategy of A20, which is electrification. In terms of the distribution system, there are a lot of losses come from poorly insulated or poorly sealed ducts. And so we want to address those. You'll see that there is a zoned item here where there are a surprising number of duplexes or multiplexes where one or more units don't have any control over the temperature of their own unit because there's only one thermostat for the entire building. And so we want to encourage individual control over temperature. And then again, just kind of scanning through here, things like insulating the hot water pipes, you can get points for. Some of the flexibility of this prescriptive checklist comes from some of these unique ways that landlords can achieve points. So by attending an energy conservation class or encouraging your tenant to do that, we wanted to award that with some points. Certain things like putting carbon monoxide alarms in the unit, which are required for new building permits, but are not retroactively required. And so there are still a lot of rentals without that. And I'll say again that this entire green rental housing policy is targeted at the health, the safety, the comfort, and the efficiency of rentals in Ann Arbor. And so there you do see health components on here. In having conversations with landlords and looking at plan reviews of new projects that are proposed, in many cases for rentals, city compost is not given. That is something that landlords wait for a request from tenants on. And so we want to, as we encourage our waste streams, as we consider our waste streams, we want to encourage compost to be a given. And then there are bonus points here for innovative measures. So if you are providing your tenants with, say, bus passes instead of parking passes, great. Sealing up windows on old historic homes where there are certain restrictions on replacing the windows, great. And then a few other things here, like motion sensors on the lighting to kind of reduce the reliance upon positive occupant behavior, remembering to turn off the lights, in other words. And then finally, there are water conservation points. There are 3 points that are required out of this that do not count towards the overall minimum of 65 points, but that are easily attainable, and that we would like to see applied in each rental unit. Jumping back over to the presentation. That's the efficiency checklist. We discussed that. Great. Okay, so now the alternative to the efficiency checklist is a performance pathway. This is another way that we are offering landlords flexibility in how they achieve the efficiency recommendations. This would involve a HERS rating at the landlord's expense, but it does give landlords very specific items on how to tighten up the unit and increase the efficiency. And so there is that payoff. It maximizes the investments that are made at that unit. And the requirement is that you would fulfill the items that are listed on your HERS rating that you get from the rater. The final policy component is this efficiency disclosure. And this is simply just making explicit that the results of your efficiency in terms of the green rental housing policy are publicly available. This is not a surprise or anything that is new. You can already find the results of any rental housing inspection on the city website. We just wanted to make sure that it was clear that these components would also be made publicly available. Let's take a look at the timeline. So starting at the beginning of last year, this is when we were doing the RMI cohort. We were beginning some best practices research. And by Q2 of last year in June, we launched the task force. It was in, I believe, August that we began the USDN Learning Group, which is still continuing through today. That gold star is where we are now in 2022. We are launching public comment, and as Missy stated previously, it is going out tomorrow, and that we are gathering as much information as possible. I will remind you that everything I'm presenting here is still a draft, so even that checklist. And we are seeking public comment from anyone in the city of Ann Arbor, anyone and everyone, about where they see room for improvement or what they think is good, or anything that we missed, so that this policy can be as effective for everyone involved as possible. We're doing the Energy Commission presentation right now. And after we conclude the public comment period in mid-April, we'll collect all of the information that we got from that, all of the questions that were submitted, all of the suggestions. And if there's anything that requires any major change to what I'm presenting on here, we'll bring the task force back together to take a second look at it and review it before passing it along for final legal review. The USDN Learning Group will be continuing on, and as will the public engagement. We will hope to have everything buttoned up by the end of 2022 so that we can launch full bore at the start of 2023. Beyond that, the implementation process will also involve check-ins for program unveiling. So as more and more people participate through the inspection process, and we get more real world feedback, we'll make adjustments as necessary. Okay, now for this when thing, I want to just throw out there that we are doing 2 public presentations. They are the same, so you don't need to attend both. They're just on different days of the week and at different times of day, just to maximize as many opportunities for people to engage as possible. There will be a survey posted to the city website tomorrow that will accompany these presentations, and that will be the survey that we are the ways that we are collecting feedback. As I already mentioned, the engagement will continue beyond program launch. We want to make sure that it is as effective as possible. And then we're also doing a number of one-on-one check-ins. We'll be meeting with landlords throughout the city individually to make sure that this policy is satisfactory and is as bulletproof as possible, and hope for a smooth, clean launch in January 23. And at this point, I'll happily take some questions from you. Thank you for your time.
Do we have questions for Zach? Commissioner Hookham.
Thanks, Zach, for the presentation. Well done. You've done a lot of homework here, a lot of great lessons learned. You've widely sought data from other cities. That's all really highly commendable. So really well done. Presentation-wise, everything looks fine to me. But the one piece that I keep coming back to is who's going to implement this and who's going to enforce it? I'm sure you faced this question before. I'm sure it's coming out down the road here a little bit in 23. Just want to make sure that you're kind of watching how you're committing. This will be a pretty big program to implement. If you have 31,500 units that have to be looked at in a couple of years timeline, that's a lot of people involved and a lot of information that's going to be flowing. So just maybe you could comment on your thoughts there and what kind of a size group you might have. That would be question one. And then who was part of the task force you've had? It'd be good to comment on. Thank you.
Really great questions. Thank you, Commissioner Hookham. The Green Rental Housing Policy, as written, is designed to be incorporated with the existing rental housing inspection process. So we already are inspecting on a 2.5-year cycle. That gives our inspectors approximately 9,000 units inspected per year. These requirements would just be tacked on to that. And so there will, in that period between when council decides on this, if they do choose to pass it, part of that 6-month delay in launching the program until the start of 2023 is so that we can get our inspectors up to speed and make any necessary staffing changes. And to your second point, we asking who the task force was. We practiced throughout the task force and agreed upon at the beginning of every task force meeting Chatham House rules, which are to share the ideas that were presented, but not the names of the individuals. And so while task force members are welcome to identify themselves as participants in the task force, we are going to respect their identity by not revealing that. So not to sound like I'm hiding anything or whatever, but the task force members are welcome to identify themselves. But like I said, that's what we agreed upon at the beginning of every task force meeting. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to, there was a stat that you presented at the beginning that I want to make sure I understand. Was it just around 50% of all rental units are, you said, single owner? What does that mean?
Single property owners. And so that means that that the owner of that unit only rents one unit.
Okay, that's what I thought it meant. I just wanted to make sure because I'm surprised at the number. I would have thought. Okay, so and it's 50% of our rental properties that only have there's just one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that leads, I guess, to the next question. So within, which is where I assume there'd be the most pushback in around this from landlords, the upgrading of, upgrades that need to be done within 8 years, right? Is that? And so the only thing that's sort of exempt from that, if you don't have energy efficient appliances, would be kind of that if you had gotten a gas heater that was 95% efficient or more. Is that right? Everything else would need, so, dishwashers or water heaters or everything needs to be done within the next 8 years. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And does this include if this is an owner occupied rental as well?
So there is already a mechanism at rental housing services to identify which units get inspected and which do not, which are owner occupied or not owner occupied. And these requirements would fall under that same purview. So if it's being inspected at all by the city, it would need to meet these standards. If there has already been a determination that it is not being inspected by the city, then it won't need to meet this.
Okay. And are we, since a lot of these appear to be, more kind of what folks would consider mom and pop operations that may not have, a fair amount of money set aside for kind of upgrades within the next 8 years, are we anticipating trying to do bulk buys or anything that might be sort of reducing these costs, or, how are we anticipating that?
Great question. The OSI loves bulk buys, and will pursue that opportunity wherever possible. We've seen that success through the likes of the Solarize program, and we've already begun exploring ways that we could tie that over to things like heat pumps and other appliances. So certainly there will be assistance wherever possible. We are going to continue tenaciously pursuing any funding opportunities possible. I will mention that should the climate millage pass in November, that there could be some funding opportunity available through that as well to help offset the delta between the cost of replacement and the more efficient unit. That said, we've looked at what that delta is between the cost of replacement and the more efficient unit. And on most appliances, it's just a few $100s. So about $300 maybe for the water heater or for the furnace. It's a little bit more than that, but overall, the cost demand for the standard replacement, the cost demand over the standard replacement is not great. And I just wanted to also make a quick clarification. This is nuanced, but I just want to point out that it's 50% of the properties are single owners, not 50% of the units. And so it just
makes more sense. Okay, that makes more sense. And I guess, this is obviously super important. I just can imagine, there's the tug here between the lack of affordability that we already have in our community and kind of a rapid push to do a lot of improvements in homes that are obviously likely to be passed upon down onto tenants. And then the energy conservation class point thing, I was wondering, is that something we're anticipating having classes are we anticipating hosting classes that tenants could sign up for? Because otherwise it seems like there might not be much consistency to the classes that people go to in terms of information that goes out.
Yes, we have been exploring certain classes that have already been offered by some of the organizations that we've worked with, such as RMI or the USDN, and incorporating those existing classes into our own. But we also want to be able to offer that flexibility to tenants and landlords to choose which works for them. And so if this is to move forward, there will be a list of classes that you can attend. Sometimes they're offered through the EPA, sometimes they're offered at the county level. And so we're trying to offer as much flexibility to this as possible.
Okay, well, thanks. Impressive work. Thanks for the update.
Do we have other comments or questions? I have a few questions and comments. I don't exactly understand how this works. Is this a mandatory program, or in order to get a green rental certificate, you need to get 65 points? So you could still be allowed to rent in the city of Ann Arbor if you just blew this whole thing off, or you had a Swiss cheese rental with 50-year-old appliances and got 5.0 points, whatever. Explain that to me. I didn't understand that.
Thank you, Chairman Mirsky. That's a great question and an important clarification. The way the Green Rental Housing Program has been designed is that all rentals will be required to meet to meet each of these standards. The checklist is an alternative option to a performance pathway. So you can get a HERS rating without needing to do the checklist and satisfy the recommendations that are being provided by the HERS rater, or you can get the prescriptive, or you can follow the prescriptive checklist and just get your point minimum. But you will have to do one or the other in order to get your certificate of compliance to rent.
Was that clear to anybody else? That was not clear to me. So I would ask that in preparation for the public sessions, that you make that very clear in the documentation. And granted, this was, I didn't have a chance to look at this in detail. I looked at it late this afternoon, but that was not clear to me. So I think that's really important. And there's probably a host of other questions that I have. I'll throw some of them out in comments, and I don't necessarily expect answers. So there are a lot of rating systems, most prominently LEED, which is probably the one that's best known by lay people, that has like silver, gold, platinum. Was there any consideration of having a silver, gold, platinum type of rating where someone could get a higher certification level? Is that something that's possible or even contemplated?
Yes, this was something that was explored. What we decided was that the city's not interested in being an independent rater or being able to identify how well things qualify. We just want to set we want it to be as simple as possible. That is in response to what we heard from some landlords, which were that there is already a sense that the rental housing process is already somewhat confusing and or burdensome. And so rather than make certain different qualifications, we streamlined it and stuck with one and just said, meet these qualifications or not. Great question.
Okay. So another question is the question posed by Mr. Garber. And that is, we have, as I understand it, a requirement, if I wrote it down correctly, in section 8.528 that already requires a certain level of compliance and improvements. And it sounds like that's not being enforced whatsoever. Based on, well, I can't say whatsoever. It's not being enforced broadly or uniformly. And I'll just give a 30-second anecdote. My nephew is a PhD student at University of Michigan. He rents a part of a 2,200 square foot home built in 1901. He and his roommate occupy one floor. There are 4 people with significant others on the second floor. And in the winter time, they split the electric bill, the electric only bill. And it is, their share is 1/2. It is $300 a month. So that's on top of gas. So there are probably people that are sitting up there in a drafty room that have electric baseboard or strip heaters or space heaters that are running constantly in order to generate a $600 electric bill. And so what I'm wondering, and they're doing that probably because the home hasn't been weatherized. So what I wonder is, are we putting something in place that is, well, maybe put it differently. Do we have something that really should be enforced and really will get us a big benefit? And what is going to ensure that what we put in place is any better than what we have right now?
Good question. Unfortunately, it's difficult to speak to this anecdote that you provided without knowing more information. It's very possible that it did meet the weatherization requirements, and the inspector saw that those requirements were satisfied. But
could be. I mean, it's 19. Yeah, so it's a 120-year-old home.
And so that's where I think the leverage and the difference comes. It enters the picture with this green rental housing program, because it takes a far more holistic approach than relying on some weather stripping. We want to be examining the entire building, and if every building is required to meet these, either the prescriptive checklist or a performance pathway, then we do believe that the science and the data is there that it will improve that standard for rentals that are like that. And I feel for this relative of yours. It's something that we heard a lot from tenants during the task force. And that kind of rental is particularly where a lot of this policy is focused. We worked really carefully to balance the tug and pull between elevating the quality of rentals in terms of energy efficiency and comfort, without burdening landlords. And like Commissioner Briggs already mentioned, that's something that's important to consider when it's not a large company. And even if it is a large company, we're not trying to burden them with extraneous costs. This program isn't about burdening anyone. We just want to make sure that there is a standard expectation. If I may, I'll share in response to what you shared, Chairman Mirsky, that there are some tenants who sign a lease and without knowing what the energy expectations are and get into the unit and learn that they're paying $350 a month for their energy bills. And that's precisely what this green rental housing program is aiming to address. That is energy burdensome to many residents, where the rent is already somewhat prohibitive for some residents. The rent costs alone adding that unexpected energy cost on top it's really important for us to address that as much as possible. And so that's why we're trying to walk that fine line of making sure that we're bringing up the standard of rentals without burdening, but also improving the overall experience for both landlords and tenants.
So just one other general comment. I'll give a brief example. When we refer to the checklist, that's this form where you get different points, correct?
Correct.
Yes. So I have a specific request, and that is that be provided to commissioners. It was not posted, so no one was able to look at it. And a concern that I just saw in looking at some of these is a landlord could put solar on the roof, could put 2 kilowatts, 1 kilowatt on the roof, get 20 points, and someone else could do a lot of ceiling work and go from an ACH 50 of 6 or 7 to 3 and get a handful of points. Another example is a landlord can install air conditioning and get points. And I have it sitting here on my desk, and many of you have worked with Saul Griffith, and I know the city has interfaced with him. Electrify America, or whatever it's called, is his organization. And he's basically recommending that no air conditioning unit should be replaced, period. That we should go directly to heat pumps. And so we're giving people points to do something that really never should be done. We should be encouraging them to spend an extra $500 and go to a heat pump, which would then also provide air conditioning, and provide the benefits during the heating season where the gas usage is dramatically reduced. So I think there's just, to me, a lot of questions, and I'll leave it at that, and I'll turn it over to Commissioner Hookham to provide some additional questions.
John, you kind of stole my thunder, because I was doing the math with the checklist, and kind of to tie a few points together. I think that your nephew's house, does he get a Christmas basket every year from DTE because they probably really like him as a customer? But, that's the negative side of this, right? The positive side of where we're headed here would be that same house, the 1901 house, to using that checklist. If they threw a few modules up on the roof, did a couple other little things, and continued to be an energy hog, doesn't really accomplish what we're trying to get through. And I think the checklist is probably going to be the route that's chosen by most people. We need to make sure that those loopholes don't exist. And I'd advocate that we have a sharper look at that, and in the implementation side here coming up, to really make sure that we don't have loopholes and that it really accounts for what we want it to do, which is making a change. Back to your first point, John, you asked the question of compliance. And so I have a neighbor who's a land baron and owns quite a few properties. I get dragged into many of them to help him fix various things. I can attest to you that 1901 house your nephew's in is not different than a lot of rental units I've been in. And so obviously the compliance side of our the notice, the ordinance that Ken cited earlier, has not been implemented. And will that question that you raised be answered, which is, can I, the land baron next door, keep going? What prevents him from keep going? What prevents him from not upgrading? What ordinance, what compliance action, what threat exists if he chooses not to do that? Does he get evicted as a rental owner? I think we really need to think about that as to how this movement really gets affected, because if it doesn't and we just kind of languish, then we don't win out. And this is a big area of greenhouse gas reduction we can get as a city. We need to make sure that that whole program of getting there works and is not a bunch of loopholes that people work around. So thank you.
Thank you. To address Councilmember Briggs's point about affordability, and there's a balancing act between burden to the renter, and what the rental cost is, but then also what is the utility cost, and then what is the transportation cost, and what is the time and transit cost. So someone can save rental costs in Ann Arbor and live in Ypsilanti and then be commuting every single day and waste an hour or more commuting. And so affordability has to be looked at holistically. And I think that's one of the questions that I think is really important in looking at this whole program and council looking at it and deciding what the implications are. This isn't just something that's a simple comparison. This is going to be relatively complicated. Chuck, I assume your question was asked, correct? You didn't have a follow-up? Okay. Any other comments or questions? I assume we have a couple of other renters here, but I guess no other comments at this time, correct? Okay, good. We also have a resolution that is posted to Legistar for our consideration. Could you put that up, Missy? So there is a preamble or something like that. There we are here. Yep. Hopefully people have had a chance to look at a memorandum. Can we get a motion to consider the resolution and a second? Right. So we have a motion from Commissioner Calvin Garcia and a second from Commissioner McCoy. Any discussion or comments about the resolution? Could you scroll back up then, Missy, or down, I should say, I guess. So it's a short resolution. Any comments or questions? So I have a personal opinion, and that is I'm not willing to vote in favor of this because I have a lot of concerns with the resolution. So I'm going to explain, my vote up front. You probably picked up on some of those comments. I recognize that based on the timetable that was presented by Zach, I believe that if we don't approve this tonight, then we still have the opportunity for the public comments and everything else to happen and still vote on this at our next meeting. So that is my position. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on their vote before doing so.
Well, this is a first reading, right, John?
This is a first reading, right? Well, we did vote on the other one, so.
Yeah, this actually, from a staff's perspective, we would prefer that you not vote on this tonight.
Okay,
this is meant to be a first reading because we want to go get public comment and be able to bring it back with the revisions based on that.
Okay. Okay, so this will count then as first reading, and we will bring it then back to the commission based on staff's recommendation. How's that sound? Very good. Okay, we have one more point other than updates, and that is a second reading of the resolution in support of workforce housing. And I submitted an updated copy of that. So Missy, if you can bring that up while I talk. And that was based on comments that an input that commissioners gave during the first reading. And those were included in the meeting minutes. And then the same resolution was considered by the Environmental Commission. And I watched that. I didn't participate in it, but I watched it, and I had an exchange with Chair Brown, Vice Chair Mitchell, and one of the commissioners, and made some changes. And those are generally noted in the right-hand column. So those are sort of details. What's not noted in the right-hand column are just a few things that I think are important. Many of the whereas clauses were reordered so that they are grouped in a way where they make more sense. So, a lot of the ones related to statistics on the growth of enrollment and things like that, those are all grouped together. The same thing about what the implications are relative to the climate action plans that the city has, the 820 plan and the PCCN recommendations, those are grouped, and so on and so forth. So those are changes that are reflected in here. There are still a few things that, in my view, need to be refined. And this is something that would then, for example, you can see at the bottom of the page, it's displayed XXX jobs. That's something that we need to get. I mean, the staff or council needs to get from the university before finally finalizing the wording of the resolution before it goes to council, assuming that is indeed the case. So without me just rattling on, what I thought I would do is open this up for discussion. We already had a first reading, and so we've already voted to consider the resolution, and we had a second. So do we have any additional comments or thoughts? I reread it actually myself, and there's a couple of things that maybe I thought we could add to strengthen the resolution. I think it was that is now in the title, but there's two other places that I think it probably belongs in the resolution. It's in one resolved clause, but it probably could go in another one. But I can get into those details. I'll open it up for other people's comments or questions if they want to offer their insights. So it looks like Councilmember Briggs.
I was just going to share that, not specifically related to this resolution in front of us, but just I think different commissions are taking different approaches to this. I know Transportation Commission, when they reviewed it, essentially didn't provide feedback on, line item changes or substance to the actual resolution itself, and more gave kind of bullet point, kind of talking points around thoughts around workforce housing and transportation. So, I don't know what the original lead sponsor of this, how she'll end up taking this into account. But I think that's correct. I know, having spoken to Councilmember Griswold, that she's appreciative of the work that the Energy Commission is doing on this.
Yeah, she has seen this latest update. I shared it with her, and I sent an email to Chair Mills of the Planning Commission and asked what they were doing, and I shared this version, and I've not heard back from her, so I don't know if anybody knows what Planning Commission is doing with this. No. Okay. So what I would recommend is in the final resolution or resolve clauses, they're in the first resolve clause, and it reads, the city administrator will provide an opportunity to provide workforce housing. And I think given that we have an 820 plan, and given we are calling for both at the university for net zero, that we include something that says provide net zero or net zero ready, maybe is a better way of putting this. I don't know if Commissioner Peck has a preference one way or the other. If the zero code is adopted at the state level and that's adopted at the city, then that would essentially mandate any new building to be net zero. I don't know if staff has a position on whether net zero or net zero ready is important in some of these resolve clauses or not.
So my understanding is the university isn't going to build new buildings unless they're net zero. Obviously, there are ones like the new hospital tower going up that was designed, years ago, really the starting, and so it didn't really, unfortunately, didn't get designed that way. It will be made net zero as the geothermal heat pump plan builds out. But they just, the new building, the first new building after the commitment to carbon neutrality is being built, and it is being built, I think, net zero. So I don't know that for sure, actually, but it's being built low carbon. And of course, it will be net zero eventually.
So Missy, as everybody saw, just typed in net zero energy. Missy, there's another use of net zero. Probably should also say net zero energy in the second to last resolve clause, right in front of affordable, or third to last. Additional units of net zero energy affordable workforce housing. Right there. Yep. And I think maybe in the title, there's also net zero mentioned, but not net zero energy, and that should probably, yeah, right after 2,000 units, exactly. Yep.
The other thing I'd like to point out is, I think I've said this before, but I'm pretty sure the university is going to be just fine with this.
Okay.
So there is a lot of talk about doing this kind of thing anyhow.
So there were, based on Environmental Commission input, there are two whereas clauses added. One recognizing the university for announcing the new, there it is right there, the construction of the new net zero LEED Gold undergraduate housing on North Campus. That's going to be 700 net new units, and those are going to be net zero. And then also there's a whereas clause that recognizes some of the things that the city has been doing also to improve housing availability. Oops, yep, thank you. So my recommendation is that this is, we apply the 80-20 rule. In this case, it's probably more like the 90-10 rule, that this will be scrutinized by council and by staff before this is acted on. So unless somebody has any other comments, I would recommend that we take a vote on this. So
if you need a move.
Okay, so we have agreement on that. So could I get a show of hands and voices? All those in favor of the resolution as we see it, please say aye or raise your hands.
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? No one opposed. Any abstentions? Very good. Thank you. It passes unanimously. Thank you very much. So we are now on the downhill ramp. OSI reports.
Thanks, Chair Mirsky. There's, as always, a lot going on. I'm going to send to everyone after this, the entire listserv, the newsletter that we sent out this week to residents, because that's kind of the easiest, punchiest way to see what's going on within the office. I also wanted to share, I think Zach left us before he could share this, that the checklist and materials for the green rental housing are on the website. So I'll also circulate to you all the green rental housing website. There's a story in MLine 2 that has a link to that. But if you want to dive more deeply in before the next discussion, please do so. And Zach mentioned we are really trying to get a lot of public feedback and doing outreach. So that launches tomorrow. Really excited to see where that goes. Also wanted to share that our very own Commissioner Peck is going to be doing an event with us on the 16th. We pulled this together, I can't even believe this, yesterday morning, I actually organized all of this. It's an opportunity to hear about the most recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that dropped last week. Pretty dire findings from that analysis. but PAC's agreed to do a presentation kind of overviewing the main takeaways. And then Corey Connolly, the Climate and Energy Advisor for the state of Michigan, is going to join us to talk about what it means for Michigan and how we can get more actively involved in the state's climate work. We'll, of course, have local stakeholders, but we wanted to kind of talk about this at different scales. So please circulate that widely. It's not just for Ann Arbor, it's for anyone in Michigan or more broadly that wants to participate. We also wanted to share in terms of the energy assessments, the options analysis, the feasibility study, and the SEU advancement. The RFP has been drafted for those. We've had some experts kind of help us look at language. Thank goodness. We have wonderful input from the commission. The resolutions that were passed actually gave really great direction, and lots of other cities have done this. So we've been able to pull from RFP language from other places. Currently, that RFP is in legal for final review, and then it will be released for bidding. We are making sure to be really thoughtful and intentional in the drafting of that RFP. Anticipate it'll be on the streets in the not too distant future. But that is for both the options analysis and for the traditional feasibility study. We're also working on the microgrid assessment for the sustainable energy utility. That's taking a little bit more time. That's more nuanced because it's not just a microgrid study. It's a microgrid study with 2 utilities. And so there's different kinds of technical questions. So we've got some experts that are helping us really make sure we frame the RFP in the right way. And I want to call out Commissioner Holcomb has been helping quite a lot in some of that space. So thank you very much, Chuck. Really appreciate it. And then just ending on one piece of good news that you won't see in the newsletter, but I want to share with you all, since last month we heard about the Bryant Neighborhood Project. We found out not too long ago that we successfully won a Solar Moonshot Award. And so we will be helping 2 residents get solar for free. And there are 2 residents that suffer from pretty high energy burden and were potentially risking losing their home. And this will stabilize those homes for them. And so they're getting energy for free. And we're really excited about that. I just wanted to share, and I want to call out again Community Action Network for their incredible partnership in that journey. Those are just some of the punch points. Newsletter coming soon. Enjoy the way too many pages. I think it's 8 pages of updates of things that are going on in OSI. Thanks, Chair Murski.
Thank you, Missy. Missy, would you be willing to comment on the questions that were asked by callers in terms of plans on the feasibility study and timetable and things like that? Or do you want to comment on that at a future time, or what's your stance on that?
Yeah, I don't know that I have much more to add than the update that we shared, that the RFP will be public, and everyone will have access to the RFP and to bid on it should they be interested. That timeline is as soon as possible, while being really thoughtful and intentional. We've had really great, I assume most interest is in the more traditional feasibility study based on the commenters that did call in. That there's great templates. I mean, these studies have been done, so that portion was actually quite simple to draft itself. We understand the urgency around this. We also understand this is potentially the biggest decision that the city will make. And so we want to make sure that we frame the RFP the right way and get responses in the right manner that are going to be robust and really intentional and purposeful so we can make a good decision. So we're trying to go fast, but with purpose in this space. So I've shared with council members too, our office is not going to show fidelity to a set time. We're going to show fidelity to an outcome.
Updates from commissioners. Looks like commissioners are approaching their bedtimes. So working group updates. As far as I know, there's only one working group. Commissioner Calvin Garcia, do we have any update or any news from the Transportation Electrification Working Group?
No, really not really. The electric vehicle readiness ordinance is still under the process of being updated, and there's really no news to share. Okay. Thanks.
And then an update from the Environmental Commission.
I guess the workforce housing covered most of that. Thank you.
Okay. So this is the second opportunity for public comment. So persons may comment for up to 3 minutes. If you're watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter the meeting ID 93767516819. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and the video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hands one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand, please press *9 on your phone and you will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area, mute any television or background noise so that we may hear you clearly. And finally, state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Okay, caller ending in 134. Welcome back, Mr. Garber.
Thank you, Dr. Stoltz, Chair Mirsky. Ken Garber again, 28 Haverhill Court. Good presentations tonight. On green rental housing, I have my suggestions and I'll try to attend one of the public sessions. Thank you for holding those. I want you to know that a week from tonight, the Planning Commission will consider the site plan for Maple Cove 2, 70 apartments in 3 buildings proposed for the corner of Miller and Maple. The developer intends to use gas heating. Planning Commission now has final say over projects like this that are not seeking a zoning change, so its vote on Tuesday is final. Approval is pretty certain. For the last 2 years, I have been doing Planning Commission public comment to urge developers like this to switch from gas to heat pumps. I'm typically the only one raising this issue. In some cases, they've actually done it, not because of me, they couldn't care less, but rather because they need rezoning to go forward. That's not the case here. How much does it matter? According to the American Gas Association, the average Michigan household requires 103 million BTUs a year for heat. That's 100,000 cubic feet of gas, or 1,000 therms. At 13 kilogram CO2 equivalent emissions per therm, a conversion factor that takes into account upstream emissions, that comes to 13 metric tons CO2 equivalent emissions per household per year just from burning gas. Multiply that by these 70 units, and you get 910 metric tons CO2 equivalent emissions per year from this project, just from gas combustion. For perspective, Mr. Barr, in his presentation tonight on City Solar, called out the 2,700 metric tons of CO2 equivalent emissions that will be offset by the City Facility Solar Project. Great gain, for sure. But Maple Cove 2, this one small apartment complex, if it proceeds with gas heating, will wipe out fully 1/3 of that gain. That's how big an impact gas combustion has on greenhouse gas emissions. And these emissions are locked in for the next 50 years. So I guess my larger point is that a lot of our work is being undermined by new rental developments like Maple Cove 2 that employ gas heating. You can say, well, there's nothing we can do right now about developers who insist on gas. I'll have something to say about that at a future meeting. In the meantime, I'll be there next Tuesday pleading with the Maple Cove developer, a guy named Mo Casham, to switch out his gas furnaces for an air source heat pump system. I'm not hopeful on this.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have any other callers, Missy?
We do not, Chair Mirsky.
Okay, I just wanted to mention one thing. I forgot to mention it earlier. To Commissioner Peck's statement about U of M building codes, there's actually a webinar tomorrow at 11 a.m. It's called the UM Climate Action Webinar Series, Campus Buildings and Emission Reductions. And it's my understanding that they're going to present their proposed building standards based on broad recommendations that were in the PCCN report. And it's my understanding there's going to be a deeper dive in the implementing A20 webinar series that's put on by the 2030 district next month. So if anybody is interested in details of those, shoot me an email and I will get you that information, at least how you can register for those. I should have announced that earlier. Any other comments or questions before I adjourn the meeting? Seeing none, thank you all for your participation. Missy, thanks for your staff for their presentations and sacrificing part of their evenings as well as yours. And at 8:25 p.m., I'm adjourning this meeting. Thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of your evening.
Good night.